Turn with me this morning to the Gospel according to Mark chapter 5. The Gospel according to Mark chapter 5. If you're not familiar with the Bible, that's okay. You're certainly welcome to look in the table of contents in the beginning and find the Gospel of Mark. That's about 2/3 of the way through our Bible. You'll hear me reference chapter and verse. Chapter is the big number on the page. The verses are the small numbers there to help us as we navigate through the Bible together. Well, if you have been following the news cycle lately, you're aware that there has been a great deal of talk about conspiracy theories. The latest of which, of course, is QAnon. Of course, QAnon is just the latest in a long line of conspiracy theories that have been promulgated throughout human history. Now, anytime I talk about conspiracy theories, the question I first get is, what, you don't believe in conspiracy theories? You don't believe conspiracies exist? No, I totally believe conspiracies exist. Human beings do indeed conspire together for various reasons, both noble and nefarious. In fact, I would say if you're a parent with young children in the home, you know all about conspiracy, right? Your children conspire together for all sorts of things, right? To avoid bath time, to avoid candy, or not to avoid candy, but to acquire candy. But you no doubt, or if you're a parent of little children, you know all about conspiracies. And I would say probably the same is true for school teachers in our midst. But that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about are the claims of elaborate, complex, and often secret conspiracies that are suspected, but yet never fully proven, right? The History Channel makes its living off of these things. These conspiracy theories are prevalent, and often they take hold because as human beings, we have a strong desire to make sense of the world as we see it. We have this overwhelming desire to make sense of the world as we see it. For example, when something traumatic happens, something that seems beyond our control, beyond our understanding, a simple explanation just simply will not do. When the President of the United States, the most powerful man in the world, is shot dead on a Dallas street, the explanation that a single gunman in the Texas School Book Depository just simply doesn't make sense. It won't do. When two skyscrapers located in the economic center of the Western world are destroyed in spectacular fashion, the explanation that it was the work of just 19 Middle Eastern men who had just learned to fly planes, that's a hard pill to swallow for many. We think surely there must be more than meets the eye here. Someone at work behind the scenes, pulling the strings and controlling the levers, influencing affairs from the shadows. And we suspect this ultimately because it's true. When we look at this world with all the evil, corruption, and brokenness, deep down, we know that there's no way this can merely be the result of fate or chance. There has to be something or someone behind all of this. And so it leads us to search, leads us to dig, it leads us to Google. And we look for order, we look for patterns, we look for structure, and in hopes of just figuring it all out. The problem, however, is that we never go far enough. We never go far enough. We often limit our focus on the plans and schemes of finite men. I often say that conspiracy theories give way too much credit to finite, incompetent human beings. And in so doing, we miss the real conspiracy. The one that has been raging from the beginning of creation. The one that is behind it all. The conspiracy that the Apostle Paul described in his letter to the church at Ephesus when he said, finally, be strong in the Lord and the strength of His might. Put on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand against the what? Schemes of the devil. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. Spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. We're not talking about some kind of excuse making here, the devil made me do it. No, but what we are talking about is a very real being, very real forces of evil at work, scheming, plotting, and conspiring against the will of God in order to destroy the souls of mankind. As we have been studying the Gospel according to Mark over these past months, we have seen how the arrival of Jesus onto the scene marks the beginning of the invasion of the kingdom of God on earth. You may remember this quote, which we quoted numerous times in the early days of our study from Dr. David Garland. He said, "For Mark, this world is God's world where God reigns as king. But the godless, in collusion with and under the thrall of satanic powers, resists God's reign." Mark proclaims at the outset of his gospel that God's reign is invading the world in a new way. We have seen the effects of this invasion in the teaching and the works of Jesus, as he has demonstrated the power over the curse of sin upon God's world. He has healed the sick. Last week, he has calmed the storm. He is the King of kings and the Lord of lords. But not only has Jesus broken the power of the curse of sin upon creation, he has also broken the back of the one whom Paul identifies in that letter to the Ephesians as the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that is now at work in the sons of disobedience. Mark has recorded that in addition to healing the sick and calming the storm, Jesus has been casting out demons. And we saw that in chapter 1 in the synagogue in Capernaum. And then we've seen these fleeting references to the fact that Jesus is going all around the region of Galilee exorcising demons, casting them out. And while these mentions have been somewhat brief, these confrontations with demonic forces, none are quite as vivid and shocking as the one we find in our text this morning. In this text, Mark brings into much clearer focus the great conflict between the kingdom of God and the kingdom of Satan. And our text this morning is found in the first 20 verses of chapter 5 here in the Gospel according to Mark. And I encourage you to, if you're not already there, turn with me and let's read, follow me as I read verses 1 through 20 here in chapter 5. This is the word of the Lord. They came to the other side of the lake, to the country of the Gerasenes. And when Jesus had stepped out of the boat, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit. He lived among the tombs, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain. For he had often been bound with shackles and chains, but he wrenched the chains apart and broke the shackles in pieces. No one had the strength to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and on the mountains, he was always crying out and cutting himself with stones. And when he saw Jesus from afar, he ran and fell down before him. And crying out with a loud voice, he said, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you by God, do not torment me." For he was saying to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." And Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" He replied, "My name is Legion, for we are many." And he begged him earnestly not to send them out of the country. Now a great herd of pigs was feeding there on the hillside. And they begged him, saying, "Send us to the pigs, let us enter them." So he gave them permission. And the unclean spirits came out and entered the pigs, and the herd, numbering about 2,000, rushed down the steep bank into the sea and were drowned in the sea. The herdsmen fled and told it to the city and in the country, and people came to see what it was that had happened. And they came to Jesus and saw the demon-possessed man, the one who had the legion, sitting there, clothed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. And those who had seen it described to them what had happened to the demon-possessed man and to the pigs, and they began to beg Jesus to depart from their region. And he was getting into the boat. As he was getting into the boat, the man who had been possessed with demons begged him that he might go with him. And he did not permit him, but said to him, "Go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you." And he went away and began to proclaim in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and everyone marveled. This is the word of the Lord. Here in this dramatic account, Mark pulls back for us the curtain, as it were, exposing this great conspiracy that lurks behind the injustice, the corruption, and the brokenness and the bondage that we see with our eyes. He pulls back the curtain for a moment, and we see behind it. We see the power and the force of evil that is there. And as this story unfolds, we witness the following. First, we see the soul-robbing conspiracy of evil. The soul-robbing conspiracy of evil. And then we see the life-restoring power of Jesus. And then at the end of the story, we see two responses. We see fear and we see faith. Jesus and his disciples have just come ashore. And of course, you know, last week they had just seen Jesus calm the storm there on the Sea of Galilee. And I'm sure they were still in somewhat of a state of shock over what they had just witnessed. And they arrive here, and as they come ashore, they find themselves in this place called the region or the country. It's described here as the region of the Gerasenes. It's located on the western side of the Sea of Galilee, and this was a Gentile region. They were no longer in the Jewish portion of Israel. They were in the Gentile region, and of course we know the most obvious reason we can tell this is the fact that they were raising pigs over there, right? You know Jews don't raise pigs, okay? They don't have ham at Thanksgiving, right? So these were unclean animals. This was a totally Gentile region. And of course, that Jesus would come to this area is important because it foreshadows a little bit of what is to come. It tells us that the mission of Jesus is not just to the Jews, but ultimately it will be for all people. But upon arriving, we're told here that Jesus is met by this man with an unclean spirit, a demon. The man is described as living among the tombs. This is not like our nice, neat, manicured cemetery. The tombs in this day would have been caves carved in, sometimes hand carved, sometimes naturally occurring into the hillside, and bodies would be set there. Loved ones would be laid to rest here in the tombs and the caves. It's not the kind of place you went and hung out. This man is living there, we're told, probably subsisting off of the food that the people would have brought and laid at the tombs for their ancestors. There's a theme here which is interesting of uncleanness that runs through this passage. So the theme of uncleanness is important. And of course, the term unclean is a Jewish term. The spirit's referred to as an unclean spirit. That's a Jewish term which originates in the law of Moses. Uncleanness, it refers to ceremonial uncleanness. It stands in direct opposition to holiness. Holy versus unclean. To be ceremonially unclean was to be unholy and therefore cut off from God. You could not enter into the presence of God and be unclean. And this emphasis on uncleanness here in the story, it sets the story up to place this man as far away from God as one could possibly be. He's possessed by an unclean spirit. He's living in an unclean place, the tombs, and he's living in proximity to unclean animals, the pigs. This man is a hopeless case. He is far beyond redemption in the eyes of the Jews. The man's dire condition is further described in vivid detail in verses 3 through 5. And the picture here is it's on one hand terrifying, and on the other hand it's heart-wrenching. Listen to how he's described. It says, he lived among the tombs. It's mentioned 3 times in this passage that he lives among tombs. There's this association here between Satan and death. He lived among the tombs, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain, for he had often been bound with shackles and chains, but he wrenched the chains apart, and he broke the shackles in pieces. No one had the strength to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and on the mountains, he was always crying out and cutting himself with stones. In this man, we see the fruit of this great conspiracy of evil on full display. In him, we see the fulfillment of all the empty promises made by the enemy of our soul. In this man, we see our world represented right here in living color. Satan, the enemy of your soul, promises you vibrant, living community. But what does he deliver? He delivers isolation. He cuts you off from life. He cuts you off from the living to spend your days among the dead. He promises you freedom. He promises you autonomy. But what happens? You end up in chains. He assures you that His path is the path to true joy and happiness, a life filled with meaning and purpose. But He leaves you crying alone among the tombs. He promotes self-love as the highest good. But He leads you towards self-destruction. As we see in the example of this man, cutting himself, an act of self-hatred among the tombs. Friends, I've seen it time and time again. How many times have I seen a middle-aged, older person sitting before me weeping because they bought the promises of the enemy of their soul. And in their life is a wake of destruction, destroyed relationships, isolation, lack of meaning and purpose and hopelessness, overwhelmed with regret. Realizing that they have been lied to. Dr. Garland writes that this man, he says, is a microcosm of the whole of creation, inarticulately groaning for redemption. He is condemned to live out his days alone amid the decaying bones of the dead, with no one who loves him and no one to love. Malignant spirits always deface humanity and destroy life. The groaning here that this man, this tension, and we remember, in Romans 8, you see that tension between the broken and sinful world and the redemption that Christ brings. And you see this playing out in this man. In fact, you see it in verse 6. Notice this, when he saw Jesus from afar, he ran and fell down before him. Now, the picture here is everything that makes a good horror film. You've got this crazed, possessed man with, who knows, I mean, you could imagine the scene with blood dripping off of him. No doubt that the other parallel passages in the Gospel of Matthew and Luke, he's naked. You can imagine this man running, probably some loose chains hanging off of him, running and charging at Jesus. When he comes to Jesus, he falls down into the dust before him. We don't know if it's because he sees and recognizes Jesus and falls before him in a state of worship and all recognizing who he is, or if he falls because he can't stand any longer. We don't know the details, but the point is, this man is clearly in a battle. Does he see Jesus and see rescue? And he seeks to come to him, but the demons are trying to keep him away. We don't know. It's quite a scene. And we see here, notice he cries out in verse 7, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you by God, do not torment me." For Jesus was saying to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." And Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" And he replied, "My name is Legion, for we are many." And he begged him earnestly not to send them out of the country. It's interesting here, the demons rightly identify and immediately identify Jesus as the Son of the Most High God. In fact, they're the only ones that get this right so far. No one else in the story is saying this about Jesus, only the demons. They've got inside information. They know who this is. They have no illusions who they are up against, who they are dealing with. And you notice here also that Mark does not distinguish between the man and the unclean spirit that is inhabiting him. They're one almost together. It's an image of a man who is completely and wholly and totally overwhelmed by evil. He is out of control. In fact, we know that he's overwhelmed by the question Jesus asked. Jesus says, "What is your name?" Now, again, remember, whenever Jesus asks a question, it's not because he's curious. It's not because he's lacking information. Right? Jesus asks questions for a reason. And here he asks this man, "What is your name?" And the man responds, or more accurately, the demons respond and says, "Legion, for we are many." That's an interesting term, legion. That term, it's not a name, it's a term. In fact, it's a Roman military term. It referred to a unit within the Roman army consisting of about 6,000 soldiers. Legion, for we are many. So Jesus is drawing this out for his disciples and all those in vicinity to say, this man is not inhabited by one spirit, but by many. He is overwhelmed. So much so that no human being has been able to do anything with this man or for this man. The best hope they've had is to try to bind him somewhere to keep him out of their midst, but even that has ultimately failed. The spirits, of course, here beg Jesus, don't send us out of the country, out of the region. It would seem that, like a military force, these spirits were an occupying force in the region. This man was kind of like their base of operations. And there's so much, of course, we don't know about angels and demons. They're referenced in the Bible, but we're not given a tremendous amount of insight into how they operate in certain ways and how they form themselves. Are they territorial? We don't know all of that type of thing, but we can gather hints from stories like this. But it seems they have this serious concern about being cast out and sent away. And in fact, I believe it's Matthew. They're begging Jesus not to send them to the abyss. And there's also a reference in Matthew where, don't have you come to torture us before the time? You see, they all knew what the end was going to hold for them. And they're fearful that somehow Jesus has come and he's going to banish them to the abyss. It's over. It's done. It's time for destruction. Verse 11, the demons, interestingly enough, begin negotiating with Jesus. It says, now a great herd of pigs was feeding there on the hillside, and they, speaking of the spirits, begged him, saying, send us to the pigs, let us enter them. So he gave them permission, and the unclean spirits came out and entered the pigs, and the herd, numbering about 2,000, rushed down the steep bank into the sea and drowned in the sea. Again, doesn't seem like demons like to roam free. We see a reference to that elsewhere in some of Jesus' teaching. It seems they like a host. They like someone or something to live in. And so here they beg Jesus to send them into this herd of pigs that was being raised nearby. And Jesus grants their request. And of course, as the story goes, as soon as the demons enter these pigs, the pigs go crazy, run down an embankment into the sea, and they all drown and die. And of course, here we see a clear demonstration of Jesus' authority over the forces of evil. Satan and his minions are not on equal footing with God. This is not a yin and a yang moment here. This is not dualism. The battle between God and the forces of evil is not an equal, even battle. These spirits can do nothing without Jesus' permission. Jesus commanded the spirits to come out of the man, and they knew that they had no choice but to obey him. The best they could hope for was maybe some sort of negotiated peace. That's what they were hoping for. So that then begs the question, why then would Jesus agree to this request? Why would Jesus allow this? Why did he not just banish them to the abyss? I mean, they were his sworn enemies after all. He owed them nothing. I mean, look at what they had done to this poor man created in the image of God. They've been wreaking havoc in this region, no doubt, for many years. Well, again, we know that everything Jesus does, he does for a reason. It would seem that the demise of these pigs served as an object lesson to all those who were watching. Dr. Walter Wessel writes this. He says, the demons were bent on destroying. Not having been able to destroy the man, they destroyed the pigs. Demons are emissaries of Satan, the destroyer. But why did Jesus, having exorcised the demons, allow them to enter the pigs? Wessel writes, Jesus wanted to give tangible evidence to the man and to the people that the demons had actually left him and that their purpose had been to destroy him, even as they destroyed the pigs. Jesus was not negotiating a peace agreement here. That's not what's happening. Don't mistake this. This is not Jesus negotiating with demons. Quite the contrary. He is making a point. He is making it clear that there is no negotiations with the enemy of your soul. There is no such thing as a deal with the devil where you win. That does not happen. There is no such thing as a deal with the devil where you win. Following this dramatic turn of events, we're told that these pig farmers flee to the city and they tell everyone what they've seen. It says the herdsmen fled and told it in the city and in the country. And people came to see what it was that had happened, and they came to Jesus and they saw the demon-possessed man, the one who had the legion, sitting there, clothed and in his right mind. And they were afraid. What a sight it must have been for the residents of this city. I mean, everyone knew this man. I mean, imagine, so I have family buried in Union Cemetery there in Georgetown, my grandparents and others buried there, and sometimes on my way home from work, from the office, I'll stop by the cemetery and just stop and look at the graves and reminisce about memories, it's growing up as a child, and I'll pray and thank the Lord for the influence of my grandparents in my life and things like that. And it's always such a peaceful place. That's why I like to drop by there once in a while. That's not what imagine if you went to the cemetery to visit the graves of your loved ones and a man comes running at you, cut up and bleeding with chains everywhere. You wouldn't forget this guy. Everyone in town knew him. Every time someone in your family died and you had a funeral and you were burying your loved one, you had to contend with this guy. It could be that that's one of the reasons they always tried to chain him up. It could be that the funeral director in the Gerasenes had in his long list of charges for your family's funeral, he had restraint of the wild man in there, $25. He was not an unknown entity. Everyone knew him. Everyone knew he was crazy. Everyone had seen this man. And there, they come out after this event, and they come out there and they see this man sitting next to Jesus, clothed and in his right mind. And what was their response? They were afraid. But think about it for a minute. What an incredible testimony of the life-restoring power of Jesus. And an incredible picture of the gospel. This man was literally an unholy terror. He had been enslaved by the powers of darkness, unable to do anything to free himself, unable to do anything to remedy his condition. I mean, that this man was in need of rescue was an undeniable fact. But who had the power to deliver him? No one. Did you notice how many lines Mark devoted there in the story to describing the fact that no one could do anything with or for this man? Over and over there, it talks about they chained him, they did this, no one could subdue him, no one had the strength. And look, it wasn't only strength and power that they lacked, but it would appear compassion. I mean, not only did no one have the power to deliver this man, but it would appear that no one had the compassion. They just wanted to chain him up out in the city. Don't bother me. No doubt these people could hear this man's cries from the hills, but they didn't want him interfering with their world. Just stay away from me. They didn't want to deal with his drama. It's such a vivid picture of what Satan does to us and how he isolates you. I've seen so many people in my lifetime. They start out, they're completely normal, just like everyone else. They join the party scene because that's where it's at, and they start having fun. They enjoy it, and they start all the stuff that everyone else is doing, and then come the drugs, and it's all good, it's happy, it's cool, we're having a good time. But then they start to get a little out of hand with the drugs, and suddenly the friends are like, "This guy's a little crazy," and next thing you know, he goes from being the center of attraction at the party to down the alley shooting up, and no one wants anything to do with him anymore. That's how Satan isolates. It's what he does. He's a master at it. That's what he's done with this man. This man has been isolated. He is out on the edges, the fringes of society, and now no one wants anything to do with him. We don't know what his story is. He may have been a very normal man. We know he has family in town because at the end of the story, Jesus tells him to go back to his family. So he apparently had a normal life at one time, but now he's isolated, and no one wants anything to do with him any longer. Stay out of our business. Stay in the cemetery. But Jesus cared. Don't miss this in the story. When others heard the cries of this man, they ran away from him. When Jesus heard the cries of this man, he crossed the sea to reach him. Friends, don't think for a moment that when Jesus got into that boat on the other side of the sea, he didn't know this man was waiting for him on the other side. From eternity past, Jesus knew this man's name, his real name. He knew of the enslavement of this man. He heard his cries, and he ordained in eternity past that this encounter would take place. Of course, not only did Jesus care, because that's important, right? It's important that Jesus cares, but if Jesus cared, but he didn't have the power to do anything, well, hey, I guess you could say maybe it's the thought that counts, but the man's no better off. No, Jesus had the power and the authority to do for this man what no one else could do, what he himself could not do, and that's bring restoration. Friends, that is what God has done for each of us in Jesus. In this story, we see a picture of the gospel. You and I, enslaved by our sin, running hard and fast from the God who created us, the one who loves us, the one who knows us better than we know ourselves. We run hard and fast from him. We embrace the evil. We embrace the world. We embrace the flesh. We get ourselves into a predicament beyond hope. We can't do anything for ourselves, and no one can help us. And we cry out. And who is it that comes? Who hears the cries? Jesus, our Creator. He comes into this world. He hears our cries. He enters into the suffering and the brokenness of this world. Suffering and brokenness that is our fault. You see, friends, we are not just merely victims of this situation that we are in and victims of this world. We are also perpetrators in it. But God sends His Son, Jesus. He comes down to this earth. He leaves eternity and enters into time and space. He enters into this world and He suffers with us. He lives among us. He lives a perfectly holy life. He experiences what it is, in one sense, to be a victim of this world, while at the same time living a life free of sin. And the Bible says that He went to the cross, and on the cross He bore my sin, He bore your sin in His body there on that cross. And the judgment of God poured out upon Him. The judgment that was supposed to fall on you and supposed to fall on me, God took it on Himself in Jesus. And the Bible says that 3 days after that death, He rose again victorious from the grave, crushing sin, destroying its power. And now He welcomes you. He welcomes all of you, everyone in this room, everyone watching, to come. The invitation is open. It is free to all. And if you will come, you will not only be forgiven for your part in this conspiracy of evil and rebellion, you will be seated at His table as His child. You will be freed from the power of sin, and you will be assured of an eternal hope. Friends, that is good news, and it is for you. And I would encourage you this morning, if you have not put your trust in Him, your hope in Him, and you are searching, you are trying to figure it out in your own mind. Maybe you got the evil in one hand and the world in one hand, and you're in Jesus in the other. You don't know what to do. Friends, let go. Let go of the empty promises of the enemy and embrace Him. Trust Christ. He is our hope, as we sang this morning. He is our hope in life and death. Speaking of response, we see the response in verses 17 and 18. It's interesting. They see this man, it says, clothed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. It's an odd response, isn't it? They see the demon-possessed man sitting there, clothed and in his right mind, and they're scared. And look at their response, verse 17. And they began to beg Jesus to depart from their region. Leave, please. Please leave us alone. Go, go. We don't want you here. But notice the man. As he was getting into the boat, the man who had been possessed with demons begged him that he might be with him. Jesus, is there room in the boat? Can I come with you? I mean, you talk about two dramatically different responses. Fear and faith. Fear and faith. You would think that when the people of the city saw this man's life restored, they would have rejoiced and celebrated. They would have welcomed Jesus into the midst. Imagine what this man could do for us. Imagine what he could do for our city. I mean, hey, come here. My mom, my dad, my sister, my brother, my daughter, my son. They're afflicted. Come and help us. But they beg him to leave. They are afraid. Now, this might be a little confusing, right? Because we know the scriptures tell us that, hey, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Well, how do I reconcile the fear of the Lord? It seems like they feared Jesus. So I'm not sure. What are we talking about? It's the wrong kind of fear. Friends, they didn't fear Jesus. They feared loss. It wasn't Jesus they feared. It was the loss of everything they held dear. That's what they feared. You see, to those who seek value, or those who seek and value safety and security, pleasure and peace above all else, Jesus represents a disruption to the system. Think about that. If your highest value is safety, security, pleasure, and peace above all else, then Jesus represents a disruption to your system. He is a threat to your carefully curated kingdom. I mean, think about it. These people had tried to subdue this man, but they had failed over and over again. Now, here comes Jesus. And in Jesus, the people of the city see a power that is much greater than their own. And this scared them. The lordship and authority that Jesus exercised over this man and his demons had implications for them. If Jesus is Lord over this man and his demons, if Jesus is Lord here, then guess what? He's Lord here. And I'm not really up for that. I know things are a little rough around here and not the greatest, and we got the occasional demon-possessed guy, but I kind of like it. It's kind of comfortable, you know. My life is well ordered. Things seem to be in place. It's all good, and I'll tolerate that if I can keep things the way they are. I don't want Jesus coming in here and disrupting everything, shaking things up. So when they were faced with this choice to keep things as they were, even if that meant tolerating the presence of darkness and evil in their midst, they chose to remain in the dark. Reminds us of what John records Jesus saying to Nicodemus in John 3, right? It says the judgment is this: the light has come into the world, but people, what? Love darkness rather than light. These people loved the darkness more than they loved the light of Jesus. Friends, what is it that you fear? Do you fear the Lord, or do you fear loss? Do you value a life that is well ordered and under control? Look, I'll be honest with you, I do. I do. I like a well-ordered life. I like things to be under control. Do you fear disruption and discomfort more than you fear disobedience to the Lord? To the people of the city, Jesus represented chaos and disruption. But to the man who was in bondage to the enemy, he represented freedom. I have found it to be true that how a person responds to Jesus often depends on what they feel they have to lose. If you value safety and security above all else, then Jesus is a threat. If you recognize that there is no such thing as safety and security in this world that is racked by sin and brokenness, then Jesus suddenly becomes safety and security to you. If you value peace and happiness above all else, then Jesus is a threat. But if you recognize that there is no such thing as peace and happiness in a world racked by sin and brokenness, then you will come to see Jesus as your peace and your joy. This is why the man whom Jesus delivered begged to stay with him. He was drawn to Jesus, and he wanted to be with him. He knew the implications of life without Jesus, and he did not want to go back there. He did not want to go back. But look at Jesus' response in verses 19 and 20 to this man. And he did not permit him, but said to him, "Go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you." And he went away and began to proclaim in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and everyone marveled. The people begged Jesus to leave, and he honored their request. But I love this. He honored the request. He left, but he didn't leave them without a witness. He didn't leave them without a witness. By his grace, he left them this man. He says, "Look, you can't come with me, but here's what I want you to do. Go and tell everyone how much the Lord has done for you. How much the Lord has done for you, and how he has had mercy on you." Friends, in a Christian culture that values radical and crazy love, true faith looks more like following Jesus all over the place. Missions trip after missions trip after missions trip. This city to that city as he performs this miracle and that miracle. All these, it's so exciting. I'll follow Jesus wherever he takes me to go. He heals the sick. He's casting out the demons. And I want to be in the action as he smacks down the Pharisees. This is where it's at. I'll go to the garden with you, Jesus. I'll go to the foot of the cross with you, Jesus. But here we see that true faith actually, in this case, means staying put. Staying put. That doesn't seem very radical. Doesn't seem very crazy. Seems boring. But it's actually quite risky, isn't it? To go back to a place where he had been an outcast and proclaimed the power of a man they had just asked to leave didn't seem like the best option, but it was the obedient option. And so the man obeyed. See, that's what faith does. Faith obeys. Faith obeys. He obeyed. He stays behind and he proclaims the truth. And tradition is interesting. Tradition records that a church was founded in this region some years later. And tradition, of course, this is tradition, but tradition has it that the ground was fertile soil prepared by the testimony of this man. As he went all throughout that region telling people what the Lord had done for him, how he had delivered him from evil. So, friend, the question this morning is, what will you choose? What will you choose, faith or fear? How do you see Jesus? In this cost benefits analysis that we so often find ourselves in, what is it that you value most? What is it that you love most? What is it that you fear losing most? Because that ultimately determines how you respond. If you value safety, security, peace, and happiness, and just a calm, convenient life, then Jesus is a threat. Jesus will be seen as a threat to you. He will be an unwelcome presence in your life. But if you come to see your condition as it really is, if you come to see yourself as the man, living among the tombs, among the dead, isolated, cut off, self-destructive. Because, friends, in reality, that is all of us apart from Christ. This man is not like some far extreme. He's us. When you come to see yourself in that place, living in a world that is out of your control, in a world that is ultimately devoid of peace and security and happiness and safety, when Jesus comes, you see him as the embodiment of all of those things. And I'd encourage you this morning to put your trust in him. Christian or non-Christian, put your trust in him. Put your trust in him to save you and deliver you. And put your trust in him to fulfill the promises that he's made to you. Friends, what you fear most will determine what you choose. What is it that you fear losing most? I know in my life that is what ultimately drives me. What I fear the loss of drives me. It drives my behavior, my emotions, my feelings, and my actions. Who or what do you fear losing most? Fear or faith?